Assassin's Creed 3, Assassin's Creed Revelations, which game is better is what we're going to discuss in today's video. Assassin's Creed Revelations was the final entry in the Ezio trilogy, and also the last Assassin's Creed game on the Anvil engine in 2011. Then in 2012 came Assassin's Creed 3 on the new Anvil Next that would then also be used for Liberations, Rogue, and Black Flag. So we are going to compare Revelations and AC3 to determine which game is better. If you're unfamiliar with how this series works, basically what I do is compare the two games on story, gameplay, and open world, and within each topic I will discuss certain subjects and award a point based on which game I think did that particular subject better, and I will leave the points on screen now. Just a fair reminder as well, this video is entirely my opinion, so feel free to leave yours down in the comments and which game you personally think is better. And without further ado, Assassin's Creed 3 versus Assassin's Creed Revelations. As per usual, we are going to start off with the story and begin by talking about the protagonists. Connor, of course, being the protagonist of AC3 and Ezio of AC Revelations. Now, Connor is at a bit of a disadvantage here, right? Ezio had a whole trilogy, Connor just had one game, but we must keep in mind Ezio is the only AC protagonist to have a sequel for a reason. He's an absolutely phenomenal character, and to many people, probably even myself, he's one of the best protagonists in video games. Not only does he have the charming, humorous personality that makes him a very likable character, he also has a very long and well-developed arc to go with it. He had 3 main entries dedicated to furthering his story. We saw him be born, and eventually we saw him die. But I think most of us already know Ezio's story and why he's so great, but I want to focus on him in Revelations. The Ezio we get in Revelations is different. Sure, the personality is still there, he's still the mentor of the assassins, but he's obviously much older. He's gotten wiser and more tactical. There's a huge difference if you compare this Ezio to the one at the start of AC2. Ezio isn't as arrogant or blunt as he was when he first became an assassin, obviously, and seeing him all grown up and gray honestly almost brought tears to my eyes. This man grew up before our very eyes, and it's very surreal and quite frankly amazing that we were even given this final chapter to his story. Ubisoft easily could have moved on to the next protagonist after AC2 or Brotherhood, but they actually heard the fans and want to provide closure to a beloved protagonist, something they would definitely fail to do today. Ezio had a long and rough journey, but he persevered, and finally he got his happy ending and closure to his character that he so desperately deserved. Of all the characters and arcs I think Ubisoft failed in this series, Ezio is certainly not one of them. Now after all that, what chance does Connor even stand? I touched on this in my AC3 Remastered review, but I always believed Connor to be a heavily underrated protagonist. Even in that video, there was still a fair amount of comments calling Connor emotionless, blunt, arrogant, boring, stupid. Okay, the last one really isn't wrong, he is stupid. But the point is, I think many people don't bother to look underneath the surface with Connor. Of all the assassins and protagonists of this series, Connor probably had to persevere the most. Never have I seen a character so steadfast and true to his convictions. Despite the hard truths and punishments he received, he still refused to waver or give up on his beliefs. I think he said it best in his deleted monologue, but despite the fact that all of his life's work was discarded and forgotten, despite the fact that people he put his trust in betrayed him, despite the fact that he lost everyone he ever cared about, he never stopped. He never gave up. He kept forging ahead. I mean, he even said it himself. Despite all that, he would do everything again because he has to believe that eventually the world will get the peace he so desperately sought. He is a very serious character. I mean, you'll rarely see the man crack a joke, but not every character needs to be Ezio. And I think Connor was exactly the kind of character he needed to be for this kind of story. And Ezio wouldn't work in this story. It just wouldn't. It doesn't fit the tone or the theme. Now, I'm not saying Connor is by any means a better protagonist than Ezio, but I am giving him the credit and respect he deserves, even though this point is going to go to Revelations. The antagonists are a little bit harder to talk about because both of these games have multiple main antagonists, and it's not exactly clear who the main villain is. In AC3, you could argue the main antagonist is Charles Lee, Haytham, maybe the Templar Order in general, or even George Washington. I'd say it feels like Charles Lee to me. That's who Connor is after, a big big majority of the story, and especially the ending, everything is tied to Charles Lee, and he's the last of the Templars in America. In Revelations, it's really unclear who the antagonist actually is. You don't even really find out until the end that Prince Ahmet is leading the Templars. He's a pretty weak and quite honestly forgettable antagonist, so this point is going to go to AC3. Plot is a different story. AC Revelations arguably has one of the best plots in the series. Getting to play as both Ezio and Altair in the later stages of their lives, Ezio's quest to open the library in Masyaf Castle, the final step in his journey, and Altair trying to reclaim the assassins and lead them out of the darkness Al-Mualim shrouded them in. I love the dynamic between Altair and Ezio. They live in completely different times, yet they feel so connected. Desmond went through both characters' memories, and both are sworn to and devoted themselves to a purpose they didn't fully understand. I mean, Connor even did the same thing as well. But seeing Ezio and Altair all gray and old, and Ezio trying to finally put this lifetime of war and battles behind him, the series had built towards Revelations up until this point, and Revelations is just a sweet, beautiful conclusion. It's not perfect, but I wouldn't have this series end any other way, and I'll never forget that ending scene where Ezio finds Altair. AC3 doesn't have a bad plot either. In fact, I talked about why I thought it to be underrated in my review of the game. Connor's mission is to kill the Templars in America and help restore the Brotherhood. My favorite part of the story was the dynamic between Connor and Haytham and the missions they work together. It provides so much insight into the views of the Assassins and Templars, why they fight even though they both ultimately strive to obtain the same thing: peace. The only difference is the Assassins believe that peace must be fought for and obtained by the people. If they are being forced and controlled into peace, that is not true peace. The Templars want to force everybody under their rule to stop the conflict, the whole free will argument that's been going on for hundreds of years. Yet in AC3, the Templars seem to make a lot more sense. I do genuinely enjoy AC3's story, but Revelation still has one of the best in the series, arguably the best, so this point will go to Revelations. Pacing is a big issue for AC3. AC3 has an extremely long introduction, first playing as Haytham, which was fine for me, but then you also have to play a lot with Connor as a kid and young adult before he actually becomes an assassin. It's hours of playtime before you're even given the hidden blade, and I think they stretched it out too much. The pacing is unbearably slow at the start, especially if you're replaying the game, and it doesn't pick up until the later sections of the game. Revelations has some decent pacing. The game starts off with a bang, you get that cinematic of Ezio fighting the Templars at Masyaf, then you have to hunt down the Templar leader and kill them. It's a really great introduction, and the game for the most part keeps that high action pace for a good majority of the game. I felt like there were a few filler arcs in Revelations which weren't too fun or interesting, but overall much better than AC3, so that's an easy point for Revelations. The modern day storyline is also a pretty easy point in my opinion. The modern day in Revelations really isn't anything special. It's a few cutscenes with Subject 16, you don't really do anything or exit Desmond's coma. The modern day in Revelations is really just a setup for the modern day of AC3, where everything finally gets paid off. The world is going to end, the Templars are after Desmond and friends, and they need to gather power sources and the key to save the world. What I really enjoy about the modern day in AC3 is you actually get to go out and do stuff. Fight Abstergo agents, go after Doc Vidic. We finally got to see the results of Desmond's training over the previous games, and it was really cool to see. AC3's modern day is the end of a chapter, and I really enjoyed it, so it's an easy point for AC3. Combat is a pretty close one. Both games have some of my favorite combat systems in the series. AC3 was the first game of the series to really completely change the combat. Up until Revelations, it was the same system, it just became more in-depth and refined. AC3 introduced the free-flowing combat system with counters and chain kills, and I really enjoyed it. It's really smooth, the animations look great, there's a large variety of weapons and enemy types. My only real complaint would be how each enemy seems to attack you one by one, when it seems they could all easily attack at once, but that's not really a major issue. Revelations combat is also very smooth, I enjoy it a lot. It didn't really change much from Brotherhood aside from the enemy types and animations, but it's a good combat system. I don't really have any issues with it, but I still prefer AC3's combat. It looks and feels so great, so point to AC3. Stealth is a pretty easy one for me. Both games are similar in tools, although Revelations does have things like lore bombs and the hook blade, of course. The guard placements and level design may not be great, but it's certainly better than AC3. Stealth in AC3 is really hard and annoying to try and get down. It takes way more effort to try and stealth your way around than it does to just run in and kill everybody in combat. The detection system can be pretty, well, trash. Not to mention the movement is a lot harder to handle and control. AC3 is a combat game, not a stealth game, and it's clear stealth wasn't the main focus when they were making it, so it's an easy point for Revelations. Parkour is in a very similar situation. They made some weird changes for AC3. The animations in AC3 I think look great. I also like the tree parkour, even though I think it's underutilized in the game. But AC3 was the first game in the series to remove the high profile and low profile system. All you have to do to climb stuff is just hold the right trigger, so not only does it feel janky and unresponsive, but you also find yourself climbing things you often don't want to. I also think it's just worth mentioning that this world really isn't designed for parkour. There's very few instances where parkour felt extremely useful and dependable. Boston and New York are very open, there aren't a lot of parkour paths, and most of the time you never even need to leave the ground. And the frontier, obviously, other than the trees, has no parkour paths. Revelations has some very solid parkour. It's smooth, pretty easy to control. It does feel a little bit worse in Brotherhood, I noticed, but it's still very solid overall. Not to mention it does have the hook blade to make parkour faster and easier, so Revelations will get this point as well. Which finally brings us to the open world. AC3's open world is very immersive. The atmosphere is great, especially in Boston. There's a lot of civilian and guard NPCs roaming around. However, the world in terms of its design, I explained earlier that the world is not well designed for parkour, and I also don't like how disconnected it all feels. Constantinople is one big main area. You don't really need to go through loading screens to get to other parts of the world. Well, actually, I guess if you want to cross the water and move around faster, but it's not necessary is my point. Now, it's not the most colorful and immersive world, and it may be a little too big for its own good, but it does feel better designed for parkour. The zip lines were fun, and it's well set up for the hook blade. Both open worlds are flawed, and there are certainly much better ones in this series, but I'm going to give this one to Constantinople. This leaves us with a final score of Assassin's Creed 3 and AC Revelations 6, leaving Assassin's Creed Revelations as the better game. This was still pretty close, and keep in mind I do still really enjoy AC3, and if you think it's better than Revelations, let me know why in the comments. I'll leave links to my individual reviews for both Revelations and AC3 in the description, and let me know in the comments which video you would like to see for which game is better next. If you enjoyed the video, I've made a ton of others like these for many games in the AC series, so check out the playlist for those and consider subscribing for more in the future. I also have a Discord server, link for that is in the description as well, and other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.